Now to your questions. We had a lot of questions around how to handle teens and defiance and questioning whether some of these strategies would be particularly helpful to teens. One question from a mom, she's a single mom, and she says, I have difficulty with keeping boundaries when my 13-year-old son has a major aggressive tantrum. I tend to back down and compromise to his detriment, which makes me feel guilty and a bad parent. How do I handle this?
Oh gosh, that is for sure a difficult situation. And I'm hearing, this parent mentioning feeling, I think you said some feelings of guilt or we're not doing this the right way. And I think that's a common experience that parents feel like, oh gosh, I want to do the right thing. And but it feels really hard and not knowing what to do. So I think that is a common experience. I think a lot of the strategies that we talked about today, you can think about extensions into adolescence. They just might not look exactly the same, right? So, in the moment of a big, explosive tantrum or something like that, it's good for parents to kind of think about ahead of time, like, what are we going to do that would be helpful in this situation? And it may be things like taking a timeout, right? Like if everyone's elevated and frustrated, right? Like maybe we're all, and I don't mean like we're going to go sit in a corner timeout. I mean like we're all going to take a break from this and come back to this when cooler heads have prevailed. And that's okay, right? Like it's okay in the moment if you're like, gosh, you know what, there really needs to be a consequence for this behavior right here. But we can say like, you know what, we can take a pause and we can come back to it. It might be a situation where having some sort of behavioral contract ahead of time could prevent this from happening. So I didn't mention, but behavioral contracting is sometimes an extension that we use with adolescents, where if there's a common hot button issue, we might help parents and teens set up a contract around that to kind of avoid the arguing. Maybe it's around homework, or maybe it's around some other sort of rule at home, but a common one is homework. Maybe it's around homework. Maybe it's if teen, you finish your homework by, let's say 8:00 at night, right? You have access to screen time or whatever the privilege might be. If teen has not finished homework by 8:00, they're not going to have access to screen time, or another strategy like that. And then it just takes out the need for any sort of arguing or negotiating. Parents and teens both agree to this to start out with, and can be a strategy that they use going forward.
Okay. How do you recommend parents manage their own sensory sensitivities while ignoring things like whining, which may exacerbate the parent's dysregulation?
Yeah. Whining's a rough one, right? Like that's like fingernails on a chalkboard for a lot of us, right? It's tough, right? And it may not always be possible. Maybe it's separating oneself from the situation is something that we'll talk to parents about, right? Like if kiddo's safe and you don't have to be right there for the whining, maybe we walk away. That doesn't always work, right? Maybe parents will work with their provider to kind of come up with some ideas for some like self-talk, right? Like, this is a behavior I am choosing to ignore because I know that it will decrease this behavior over time, right? And just reminding yourself of that as you're hearing the whining and it's tough. And there might be times where it just doesn't work. Like maybe the ignoring isn't going to work for one reason or another. And that's okay too, right? Like we don't have to be perfect with ignoring. It's just consistency as much as possible.
Okay. What do you recommend for parents who are just not on the same page about these recommendations? My husband is more of a traditional parent. He doesn't buy into these types of positive parenting strategies. Therefore, my efforts to be positive end up being torpedoed when my partner regresses into the power struggles. How do we get on the same page? I feel like we have two very challenging fronts, and a kid and a partner.
Oh boy. This is another really common concern that families may bring to behavioral parent training, where, we don't have good alignment between caregivers about how to approach these things. Sometimes through both parents participating in the program, that we might get on the same page. Behavioral parent training includes a lot of different strategies. Some parents, and even not all parents like all of them. Not all strategies work for all families or for everyone in the family, right? So if one caregiver maybe likes to use a lot of praise or planned ignoring, maybe the other caregiver gets on board with some of the other strategies. That can help. We don't have to have everyone doing exactly the same thing when we're all working towards the same goal. Sometimes only all we can get is one parent participating, right? And I mentioned that earlier. Like, it's great when we have all the caregivers involved doing the same thing, but a lot of times it's just not feasible. And in that situation, having one parent do it can sometimes be helpful. Not always, but sometimes can be helpful. But it is definitely frustrating when folks aren't on the same page.
Someone asked, how do you apply punishment when there's a fear of things like self-harm?
Oh, gosh. When this sounds like we're asking about kids who might have more than one thing going on, right? Like, we may have difficulty with behaviors, but we're also experiencing some difficulties with mood or self-injurious behaviors. That is always something to navigate very carefully with the providers and your care team that you're working with, right? Because we don't want to inadvertently make things worse by including a punishment. So I would say those are often very individual situations that it's good to consult with your care team to come up with a plan.
Okay, we had quite a few questions around defiance and aggressive oppositional behaviors. So I'm going to combine a few. Do you have tips for handling very aggressive oppositional behaviors and extreme behaviors, such as when my child pees on the carpet when he's upset?
Oh boy, that is a very big behavior. So the question is around like strategies for handling defiance. It would be great. I would love it if there was like a do this one thing for defiant behaviors and it'll get better. The thing with the strategies that we talk about in behavioral parent training is that we really talk about using them all together. So by starting with the positives and building the positive parent-child interactions through the praise and positive attending, by setting clear expectations, by adding rewards for appropriate behavior, right? Then we're allowing kids to be more successful. So we're increasing the positive attention, we're increasing the rewards. That's going to bring down the temperature, right? And kind of help add more positivity into the parent-child interactions, which that in itself may cause some of these big tantrum behaviors to decrease. But then we work on layering in consequences like timeout or privilege removal for these big conduct behaviors, right? Where, we're destroying property or we're being aggressive or whatever it may be. We're working with families to set up a very systematic way of implementing a clear and consistent consequence when those behaviors occur to further reduce those behaviors over time.
Okay. Someone says, what happens when you start to take away things and it just doesn't matter? It just doesn't produce the kind of behavior you're seeking?
Oh, we hear this a lot, especially I would say pretty much every time I have ever been doing group-based behavioral parent training and we get to the session about like taking away privileges and you start talking about this, there will inevitably be multiple families in the room who are like, no, but we've done that and it didn't work. And here's where behavioral parent training can really help beyond trying to do these things on your own, is that someone who's an expert in behavioral parent training can really help parents break down the way that they have been doing this, and maybe identify some small tweaks that will let that strategy be more effective in the future. Sometimes it's not that taking away things isn't impactful for the particular child. It just might be that we need to sort of like tweak it a little bit, fine tune it a little bit for it to be more effective.
Okay. With our daughter, the thing we struggle with most is getting her out of bed in the morning and getting to school. It can take up to 20 minutes for her to make a move from the bed to the floor. We have a consistent routine, but she really struggles with just getting out of bed. And it tends to set off a lot of morning tension in our family.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have suggestions for this?
This is a great scenario where some sort of reward or privilege might be a really great plan. I don't know how old this kiddo is. Depending on the age, you might think about a contract if it's an older adolescent, or if this is a younger child, maybe some sort of reward system where if we get out of bed and get ready for school on time, we get access to a privilege, something that would be reinforcing, and preferably something that could be given in the morning. In behavioral parent training, we might troubleshoot with a family like, okay, what can we do if kiddo gets out and gets ready for bed on time, right? Like, or gets ready to go to school in the morning on time. Is it screen time? Is it a special treat for breakfast? Is it, something else? Maybe getting to sit in a preferred seat on the way to school in the car. Is there something that we can incentivize being on time with? And then the conversation in the morning is, hey, you met your goal, great, you get access to this. Or if we didn't, okay, we don't have access to this reward all the time. A lot of times too, you might have to build in some sort of backup consequence, because kids not getting ready for school has an impact on everybody, right? It probably impacts caregivers getting ready to go to work or to school themselves, or other people in the family. So there might also need to be, in addition to the reward for doing a good job, if we're really late and that impacts other people, maybe there's an additional consequence later that evening. Like if you take so long that mom and dad have to be late for work, or that you miss the bus and we have to take you to school, maybe there's no screen time this evening, or some other type of privilege removal.
Okay, a teacher asks, she's an elementary school teacher, 3rd to 5th grade. She says, how can teachers better support students who are consistently laughing, blurting out, and being disruptive to other students in the class?
That is a great question. This sounds like a situation that could be a really great fit for pairing planned ignoring with praising the opposite, right? And it's really going to depend on how disruptive it is, right? Like I mentioned earlier, planned ignoring is not good for big behavior. So if we're talking about exceptionally disruptive laughing and whatnot, planned ignoring is probably not the best approach. But if we're talking about occasional, we can ignore it, right? Ignore it. Praise the kids who are sitting quietly. Provide positive attention to the child who tends to be disruptive and laughing the second they're quiet, right? Or doing what they're supposed to. And pairing the planned ignoring with the praise that way can be really effective. If we're talking really disruptive behaviors in the classroom, then maybe it's working with some type of daily report card, reward and consequence setup that can more specifically target those behaviors.
Okay, we had a few questions around how effective timeouts might be, and a few people said for children who have neurodiversities, it actually might make them even more dysregulated because they don't have the skills to sit in a timeout. What are there alternatives, or is there something else to this? What do you think about that?
That's a good question. Timeout is an interesting consequence because it is a consequence that requires compliance, right? Like you can say to kiddo, hey, you have done X, Y, and Z. You get a timeout for that behavior, go to timeout. But you're giving a consequence to a kiddo who was just not doing what they were supposed to do. So not all kids are going to initially comply with timeout. In behavioral parenting, a lot of time we talk about practice ahead of time, not when a behavior is happening and we need to use it, but just explaining timeout to kiddos before using it, practicing going to timeout, emphasizing things like early release from timeout for cooperating, backup consequences to timeout for not cooperating. So that early release that I mentioned earlier, like remember, if you go to timeout without arguing, it's going to be shorter. Or for a kiddo who's going to refuse timeout, taking away something else until the timeout is completed. A lot of times that can help a child learn to cooperate with timeout, but not always. And when that's not working, that's the good time to troubleshoot with your care team about what might make sense for an alternative kind of consequence. Maybe it's privilege removal in some other way. Maybe it's grounding. For older kids, timeouts usually aren't the most effective anyway. It might be like removing screens for an afternoon or a day or something like that.